Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Bitten by the Alpha by Annabelle Jacobs. Narrated by Antony Ferguson. Chapter 1. Cam stood at his window overlooking the street below. To the left lay the start of Regent's Park, and he yearned to be down there, to shift and run, feel the damp grass under his paws. He could put it down to recent events. The past few weeks had been trying, but that wasn't the only reason. The October sun warmed his face through the glass, and Cam smiled, the feeling bittersweet. He'd met his wife in early October, 15 years ago, and Cam remembered it with a clarity that he both treasured and hated. Autumn was her favorite time of year, all those colors captivating her as the leaves changed from a lush green to a mix of orange, yellow, and brown. Even though he missed her every single day, the sight of the trees turning always made him smile. Now it was Cam's favorite time of year, too. His phone rang, startling him, and the number on the screen made his heart stop for a beat. The Alpha Council were the last people he wanted to hear from. "Cameron Harley?" he answered, brows drawn together. What could they possibly want? A dozen scenarios filled his head, none of them good, but Cam pushed them aside. Speculating wouldn't help. "Good morning, Alpha Harley." Alpha Karen Wallace's smooth, commanding voice had him standing a little straighter. "I imagine you're curious as to why I'm calling." Relaxing a little, Cam smiled, wryly. That's one word for it. Laughter sounded in his ears. "I'll get straight to the point, then. Alpha Tregarrick of the Penwith Pack has a request which I am duty-bound to relay to you." The Penwith Pack territory was down near Penzance, Cornwall, where the council had sent Felix Martin. Cam bristled, not liking where this was headed. "Oh? Since the Penwith Pack took in a member of your pack, Alpha Tregarrick is requesting that you return the favor." "Felix wasn't a member of my pack. He was a rogue shifter who we took prisoner." Alpha Wallace sighed, and Cam got the feeling she'd expected him to say that, but was still disappointed in him. "I'm aware he wasn't strictly a member of your pack, but you did take him in and ask for leniency on his behalf. So, in this instance, I'm inclined to say Alpha Tregarrick has a point." Fuck. Cam had known deep down that particular decision would come back to haunt him. Probably some troublemaker that Tregarrick wanted shot of, and that was all Cam needed at the moment. He had plenty of his own to deal with. The transition from 2 packs to 1 wasn't all smooth sailing. Not that he'd expected it to be easy, and he had enough to sort out without adding to it. "He wants me to take a member of his pack in return for Felix." "Yes." She paused, and Cam waited, knowing she wasn't done. "This would be a courtesy between alphas. I can't order you to do it." Cam rolled his eyes. Not directly, maybe, but he doubted a refusal would go down well. Fine. If they were a troublemaker, he'd stick them in Alec's unit. They'd soon behave. "Of course. Please tell Alpha Tregarrick I'd be only too happy to return the favor." Alpha Wallace laughed again, like she knew exactly what he was thinking. "I thought you'd say that. A good decision, Alpha Harley." "Can I ask who he wants us to take?" Might as well get a name. "His daughter, Rachel." "So, let me get this straight." Alec took the cup of coffee Cam handed to him, nodding his thanks. "The Penwith Pack Alpha wants his daughter to join our pack." Cam nodded. "Yes." He gave the last cup to Gareth and sat down on the arm of the sofa. "It's not permanent," he added quickly, "but probably for at least a couple of months, as far as I understand." His 4 beaters watched him with varying expressions, and guilt reared its ugly head. Jason and Paul should be at this meeting too. These four aren't my only beaters now. The transition from 2 packs to one large one was proving as hard for Cam as it was for everyone else, a fact he was none too proud of. He was the alpha. The example should be set by him, and excluding his newest beaters from meetings was not the way to go about it. He would never admit this out loud, not even to the 4 people sat in front of him, but the fact was, he didn't know either Jason or Paul well enough to trust them, not completely. Jason, yes, to some extent. Newell had ordered his death, so there was no love lost there, and Jason had recovered from his injuries under Cam's supervision. But both Jason and Paul had been beaters to another alpha, one who hated Cam, and he had to wonder if even a trace of that loyalty remained. "Cam?" Alec nudged his knee, and he glanced up to find everyone staring at him. Clearly he'd zoned out and missed something. "Sorry, what did you say?" He needed to do better than this. Alec frowned, but thankfully kept his thoughts to himself. "I asked if you'd spoken to the Penwith Alpha." Giving himself a mental shake, Cam focused on the matter at hand. "Yes, I have. But before I go into details, there are a couple of people missing from this meeting. Give me a moment." Going against his gut instinct wasn't something he made a habit of, but in this instance, Cam was certain it wasn't working in his favor. For them to come together as one pack, he needed to do this, or he'd never establish trust between them. His wolf would come around in time. Grabbing his phone from the table, he sent a quick text to Jason and Paul, requesting their presence at his flat, and waited for the messages to be read before setting it back down. Gareth raised an eyebrow and said what the others were probably all thinking. "Is that wise?" Possibly not. Standing, Cam moved to the center of the room and turned to face them. "I realize this'll take some time getting used to, but we're one pack now. We need to start acting like it. Jason and Paul, and the new beater when I appoint one, report directly to me, as do the 4 of you. They have every right to be at this meeting, and carrying on without them is an insult to their position in this pack." It came out sharper than he'd intended, but he was angry, more at himself than anyone else. Still, a precedent had to be set. "You're all beaters. Please treat them with the respect they deserve." Shock colored Gareth's features for a second before he caught himself. "Of course." Cam sighed and rubbed a hand through his hair. Softening his tone, he said, "I know this uncertainty and awkwardness is my fault. I haven't handled the merging of our 2 packs as well as I'd hoped to, and for that I apologize. But there are 6 beaters in this pack, not 4, and we all need to remember that." A knock on the door broke the silence. Perfect timing, in Cam's opinion. Swallowing his apprehension, he marched out into the hall to open the front door. Both Jason and Paul stood on the other side, looking equal parts curious and wary. Another thing that was his fault. But then they'd been under Newell for so long, they were probably waiting for Cam to show his true colors. And who knew what crap Newell had fed them for the last 10 years? Maybe they were expecting Cam to find an excuse to demote them, or something similar any day now. Regardless, it was his job to reassure them. For fuck's sake, he really was doing a piss-poor job of bringing the 2 packs together. It had all seemed so straightforward when he'd discussed it with the Alpha Council. They used to be part of the same pack. Some of the younger members had even shared school classes before the split, and with Newell gone, the door was wide open to be that way again. The reality, however, was far more complicated, as Cam was quickly finding out. 10 years allowed for a lot of resentment to build. "Jason, Paul, come in. The others are in the living room." He stepped back and ushered them inside. "Others?" Jason glanced back over his shoulder, confused. This wasn't the first time Cam had met with them, but it would be the first time he'd met with all of his beaters at the same time. He gestured for Jason to keep going. "My other beaters." Jason didn't try and hide his shock at that. "Oh." Paul was still facing forward, so Cam couldn't read his expression, but he'd bet it was much the same as Jason's. They had a long way to go, but hopefully this was a step in the right direction. He followed them into the room, managing to smother his sigh when Paul and Jason stood together beside the fireplace, rather than one of them taking the empty seat next to Darryl. Baby steps. "Okay." He clapped his hands together, focusing everyone's attention on him. After giving a brief recap of what he'd already said, he added, "The conversation I had with Alpha Tregaric was brief. Apparently he'd prefer to discuss this in person." Cam paused, letting that sink in. "I'm going to drive down and collect his daughter." "So you've already agreed to take her?" Alec didn't sound all that surprised. "I have." They didn't need to know Alpha Wallace had given him little choice. "We leave tomorrow morning at 6. "We?" Alec raised an eyebrow. "As in—" Cam smiled. "This is why I asked you all here. With the current state of the pack, I thought it prudent to appoint Alec and Jason as temporary pack leaders during my absence. This should appease all members and hopefully avoid any further unrest." As head of the security unit, Alec would usually accompany him on trips, but the way things were at the moment, he was Cam's first choice as stand-in pack leader, with the other beaters backing him up. The new arrangement might take some adjusting to, but he had to look out for his newest members too, and having Jason alongside Alec would hopefully reassure them. "Gareth and Mike will accompany me, along with 2 of their unit each." It might have been a formally requested visit, but he wasn't about to enter another Alpha's territory without sufficient backup. No doubt there would be more discussion between them as soon as they left his flat, but as long as they did as requested, that's all Cam could ask for. If they needed to complain to each other or let off steam, then so be it. "Any questions?" Alex spoke up. "Are you going to tell the rest of the pack?" Good question. Trust Alec to ask it. As Alpha, Cam made the decision on who was allowed to join their pack. He didn't have to ask for permission or get a majority vote, but he liked to keep his pack informed. Relations within the pack were strained in some quarters, though, and Cam wasn't sure he wanted to advertise the fact he'd be gone for a day or so. He met Alec's gaze. "I'm sure you have an opinion on the subject. Let's hear it." Alec grinned at him, then his expression sobered. "I think in this instance you should keep it quiet if you can. No one needs to know that you'll be away." He shrugged. "I'm not suggesting you lie. If anyone asks, we'll tell them the truth, but I see no advantage to announcing it to the whole pack." Cam glanced around the room at his other beaters. "Anyone else have something to say?" Mike, Darryl, and Gareth all murmured their agreement with Alec. Jason and Paul were having some form of silent conversation, so Alec waited for them to finish. Jason glanced at Alec, then Cam. "Newell never told us anything, and normally we'd be all for keeping the pack informed, but in this case we agree with Alec. There are certain members of our old pack who are taking a little longer to get used to the idea of a joined pack." Cam smothered the snort of inappropriate laughter threatening to burst out, because that was putting it mildly. He knew for a fact, despite everything Newell had done, some of his pack still thought he'd been treated unfairly. Nodding, Cam hummed under his breath. "Fine. I'll hold a pack meeting when we're back to introduce our newest member." He also needed to find a replacement for Wes, but that would have to wait. One thing at a time. "That's all for now. Mike, Gareth, I'll see you here first thing tomorrow." As everyone stood to leave, Cam caught Alec's eye. "Stay a minute, I'd like to have a quick chat." Alec glanced at the others as they filed out of the room, then raised his eyebrows in question. "It's more of a personal nature." He smiled when Alec groaned and sat back down. Alec had mellowed a lot since he'd bonded with Mark, but he'd still had a rough edge to him. Cam loved that about him. Alec didn't shy away from the hard decisions, but talking about feelings had never been his favourite thing. Cam would be lying if he said he didn't take a little delight in watching Alec blush. His cool, fierce beta rarely showed his vulnerable side, but one topic guaranteed to bring it out was Mark. Cam considered himself fortunate that Alec trusted him enough to let his guard down. When they were alone, Cam took the seat opposite and rested his hands on his thighs. "How's Mark adjusting?" Alec frowned. To being bonded, losing his alpha, or to being part of one big pack again? Cam's main concern was the bond, but if Alec was in a sharing mood, all of those things. With a sigh, Alec leaned back against the sofa. "Newell being gone is the perfect outcome as far as Mark's concerned, but that's no great surprise, considering." "True. If anyone from the Primrose Hill pack would be glad to see the back of Newell, it would be Mark, along with Jason and Will. As for the merging of the packs," he rubbed at the slight stubble covering his jaw, "it'll take time to get used to. I suspect he's getting shit from some of his old pack for being with me, but he insists everything's fine. I think he's concerned about what I might do to them." Cam barked out a laugh. "I can't imagine why." Alec was loyal to a fault, especially when it came to his mate. "As much as I understand your need to protect him, maybe this is one problem Mark needs to sort out for himself?" "Yeah, I know." It looked as though the words pained him to say. "I'd like to scare the little bastards to death, but I think that would only make things worse, and I don't want this to escalate into something requiring you to intervene." Cam didn't either, but he wouldn't tolerate bullying in his pack. "If Mark ever feels like it's gone too far, don't hesitate to tell me. I'm all for letting people handle their own issues, but sometimes the only way is to let the alpha sort it out. I want us all to be comfortable with this new arrangement, but in some cases that might not be possible." Alec hesitated, as though trying to put off answering. Cam knew full well the thought of running to his alpha wouldn't sit well with Alec, but he'd have to suck it up. "Fine. I'll keep that in mind." "Thank you." Alec got up to leave, his scowl vanishing in an instant, replaced with a huge smile. "And he's adjusting to our bond just fine." Wow. Alec, all love-struck, was a sight Cam thought he'd never get to see. He gripped Alec's shoulder and met his gaze. "Good. I don't think I've ever seen you this happy. It's a joy to behold." Alec rolled his eyes, as though Cam was ridiculous, but Cam didn't miss the faint blush colouring his cheeks. "He's good for me." "He is." Cam smiled and followed Alec out into the hall. "Don't cause any trouble while I'm gone." "I'll do my best." Alone in his flat, Cam walked back into the living room and sank down onto the sofa with a sigh. 1,000 thoughts ran through his head. So many things to do and keep an eye on. He loved being an alpha. His pack were like one big family that he needed to keep safe, but these past few weeks had been hard. The Primrose Hill pack were like extended family that had moved away years ago and were now trying to live together again. Some were going to dig their heels in. Cam pulled out his phone and clicked on his emails. The one he'd got that morning had been disappointing to read, but Cam couldn't say he was all that surprised. Scrolling through, he found what he was looking for. Sent from the governor of Krellick Hall, the humans' shifter prison. The one where Stephen Newell and Wes Colford were currently serving out their sentence. He read it again. From Michael Fleck. To Cameron Harley. Re Newell Colford Visitation. As requested, please find attached the previous week's visitor logs for prisoners Stephen Newell and Wes Colford. The logs for the last couple of weeks had been empty, no one choosing to go and see their ex-alpha or beta. Cam had started to think he'd overreacted asking for them to be sent to him, but then today's email had come. He clicked on the attachment. Still, no one had been to visit Wes, but 2 names were on the log for Newell. 2 names that Cam was starting to hear way too much for his liking. They hadn't done anything wrong in going to the prison. It wasn't against pack law. Losing your alpha suddenly like that took some getting used to. Ordinarily, Cam might have thought nothing of it. 2 pack members adjusting to the merging of the pack, in their own way. But this was Newell. Setting his phone down on the sofa cushion, Cam closed his eyes and sighed. It would have to wait until he got back from Cornwall. Chapter 2. At 6:45 a.m., Gareth slipped on his jacket and left his flat. He'd been up since 5, unable to sleep. Not that he didn't like a road trip. Getting out of the city always made for a nice change of pace, and Cornwall was one of his favourite places. But something about this particular trip felt off. Or maybe it was just him. Gareth wasn't a huge fan of change. He liked his pack the way it had been, a unit to be proud of. 3 fellow beaters who would always have his back, and an alpha he'd give his life for in a heartbeat. After the mess with Newell, merging the 2 packs had been the best option for all involved. Rationally, Gareth knew that, but the in-between period left him uneasy and uncomfortable. His unit hadn't changed, and for that he was incredibly grateful. They were the one thing he could count on to remain as they were before the packs joined. But now there was a whole slew of shifters that he didn't know. 10 years as separate packs had made them strangers, and 2 new beaters, with a 3rd yet to be announced. He knew Jason and Paul well enough to accept that they were nothing like Wes, but he didn't trust them completely yet. That would take time. And Cam. Gareth had watched as his alpha took on more responsibility with nothing but a smile, as though it was the easiest thing in the world. But despite his best efforts not to, Gareth paid too close attention to not notice the signs. Cam was tired, stretched thin with everyone wanting his attention, and Gareth hated seeing the dark shadows under his eyes. He wanted to talk to Alec about it, but hesitated. Cam was their alpha. There was a fine line between concern and questioning his competence. The last thing Gareth wanted was to imply Cam was doing a poor job, because he wasn't. Cam was an amazing alpha. The fact the pack merge had gone as smoothly as it had was a testament to that. But there was always those who would drag their heels, on both sides, and that was taking its toll on him. Gareth tried hard not to be one of them, despite his feelings of unease. They would pass in time, and he wanted to support Cam, not cause him stress. He met Nathan and Luke in the foyer. As per Cam's instructions, he'd only told them they were accompanying him on an overnight trip to check on Felix. He hadn't mentioned Cam or the new pack member they'd be picking up there. "Nathan, Luke?" They both nodded in greeting and fell into step behind him. The sunrise met him as he walked out of the main front door onto the pavement, the sky a cloudless pale blue, promising a beautiful day ahead. Instead of heading to where he normally parked, Gareth carried on walking. It took 2 seconds for Nathan to ask, "Where's your car?" "Parked outside Cam's building." He glanced over to find Nathan studying him. "No spaces you fancied outside ours?" There had been at least 3 right outside the door. "We're meeting some of the others." The fresh air put a spring in Gareth's step, and he was much more like his old self by the time they reached Cam's building. 2 black SUVs were parked outside. Mike leant against one of them, keys in hand. "We're all set?" he said, nodding at the car behind him. Gareth fished out his keys and unlocked the other car. "We'll follow you." Once everyone was in and buckled up, Gareth pulled out into the traffic after Mike. Nathan turned in his seat to face him. "All right. This is far too cloak and dagger for 7 o'clock in the morning. What's going on?" Keeping an eye on the road as he spoke, Gareth decided they were far enough away for him to tell the truth. "Nothing exciting. Don't build your hopes up. Nathan snorted. I think I've had enough excitement over the past few months to last me a lifetime. Gareth couldn't help but smile at that. Nathan did tend to be a magnet for trouble. We are going to check up on Felix. That part wasn't a lie. But the main reason for going is to pick someone up and bring them back with us. A new pack member? A temporary new member. Gareth flicked his indicator on and put his foot down a little to stay with Mike. And Cam's in the other car with Mike. Nathan let out a low whistle. Who's this new member, then? The Alpha himself? He grinned, glancing over at Gareth. Nope, his daughter. Again, the uneasy feeling returned. That silenced Nathan for all of 2 seconds, and then, how old is she? I have no idea why. He shrugged. Just wondered. Gareth sighed when he caught Nathan's smirk out of the corner of his eye. Out with it. Well, Cam's an eligible bachelor. He looked over at Gareth as he spoke, and Gareth struggled to keep his expression neutral. Even more so now that our pack is so much bigger. As much as it pained him to admit it, Nathan had a point. But Gareth had been there after Cam's wife died. He remembered how hard it hit him, and so should Nathan. I don't think Cam will ever remarry. Mia's death broke him. They might not have had a mate bond like Nathan and Jared, but Gareth was sure it was as close as it could get with Mia being human. Nathan blew out a breath, all traces of humor leaving him. Yeah, you're probably right. Mia was special. I'm not sure anyone could take her place in Cam's heart. Yep. Gareth gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. That was the cold, hard truth that kept his traitorous feelings in check. Cam's heart belonged to his dead wife and always would. The atmosphere in the car had turned somber, and Gareth didn't want to spend the next 6 hours thinking about something that could never be. He turned the radio on, deliberately picking a station he knew Nathan would hate. Predictably, Nathan pulled a face as soon as heavy metal filled the car, his look of horror tugging Gareth's mouth into a reluctant smile. No! He reached for the radio controls, and Gareth only made a half-hearted attempt at stopping him. I'm not subjecting my poor eardrums to this for the next couple of hours. Luke laughed from the back seat. More like 5 or 6. What? It takes at least 5.5 hours from here, maybe even more depending on traffic. Nathan glanced over his shoulder at Luke, then back at Gareth. You never mentioned that yesterday. You never asked. In that case, we definitely need something better to listen to. Muttering under his breath, Nathan fiddled with the radio until he found something more to his taste. There. Gareth wouldn't admit it, but he was pleasantly surprised with Nathan's choice of music. I hope she's worth all this effort. And just like that, Gareth's uneasy feeling was back. They stopped for an early lunch at Taunton Dean Services on the M5. Gareth pulled into the car park beside Mike's car and turned off the engine with a sigh. Traffic had been heavy around Bristol, and it had taken longer than predicted. They'd more than likely be driving for about 7 hours in total. Not wanting to troop into the services en masse, this far outside of London, shifters weren't exactly commonplace, Gareth sent Nathan and Luke in to fetch coffee and sandwiches for everyone. Leaning against the side of the car, he cracked his neck from side to side and stretched out his shoulder muscles. What he wanted to do was run, stretch out all his muscles, and let his wolf have free rein. If he closed his eyes and concentrated, he could almost imagine the wind on his face and the hard, damp earth beneath his paws. The car door next to him opened and closed, Cam's scent drifting over on the breeze, but Gareth kept his eyes shut. Settling next to him against the car, Cam nudged his shoulder. Everything okay? Gareth nodded. Yeah, just tired. I could do with a run. Me too. Cam exhaled loudly and relaxed against the car, their shoulders still touching. The last full moon...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?